Hey, and welcome back to my channel. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want to hear more updates on behaviour, big feelings, child development and mental health. In this week's video, we're going to be talking all things tantrums, meltdowns, big feelings. We're going to be looking at why our children can't control those big feelings and what we can do as their grown-ups to help them. If you haven't met before, I am Emma. I'm a mum of two and a teacher to, well, quite a few actually. These days I spend most of my time across the school, which is amazing because I get to come into contact with so many different children and it gives me such a huge experience. It's also very different to being a mum. I've worked with children for my entire career in schools, nurseries, their homes, and even in gyms too. So it's quite likely that things you're dealing with your child when it comes to their big feelings, I've been there before. I know how hard it can be, and luckily I've picked up quite a few handy tips along the way. The advice I share in this video isn't the law though. You can pick and choose what works for your family. What works for one of your children might not work for the other one. What works for your child might not work for your friend's child, and that's okay. Just pick and choose what works for you. If you've got any questions, just pop them underneath the video and I'll try my best to come back and answer them for you. Oh, and quick reminder, the March Parenting Reset, all about being a calmer parent in 21 days, has just started, but it's not too late to join. Again, I'll put the details underneath this video. Click through and join us. I promise you're going to get so much from it. Anyway, back to today. Why do children experience such big feelings, and is it normal? Is it okay that it happens? Simply put, yes. Children don't decide to be dysregulated. Tantrums and meltdowns are a really normal part of childhood. Even if you've been led to believe up until now that tantrums just happen because a child's got a problem with their behaviour or because a parent can't control them, that's actually not the case at all. In fact, most children, I always want to say all children, will have tantrums with the person they feel the most comfortable with, where they feel the most safe. So if your child is having their biggest blow up in emotions and feelings in front of you, it's probably because you're the person where they feel the safest, which I know it's hard, but that's actually a really incredible thing for your bond. Human brains take years to develop, and I've got another video on this that you might be interested in. But simply put, there's kind of a view in society that toddlers are the only people that have tantrums and that older children can't have them. But actually this is not the case, because the brain takes so long to develop. It's really normal that our older children can experience these sorts of meltdowns too. And even though there are like developmental spurts throughout the early years, it can take up until our mid-20s for our brains to be completely there with everything. So actually, if a 14-year-old or a 24-year-old might have some sort of meltdown, then it's only natural that an 8 or a 10-year-old might do too. Children cannot be relied upon to be calm and collected all the time. They are physically and mentally unable to control these big feelings, and that's why we sometimes see children throw themselves on the floor. It can seem like an overreaction to an adult, but to a child, they need to express themselves. They need to physically let those feelings out in order to feel better. It's actually better to do that than to suppress their feelings like many adults do. The one thing I want you to know is they're not naughty, they are overwhelmed, and it's a really different thing. So what are some signs that your child might be struggling with their big feelings? I think in some ways, big feelings are almost the easiest thing to identify because they're big. You tend to see them. You see shouting, screaming, crying, acting what you may deem to be irrationally, overreacting, behaving out of character, or any real change to your child's behaviour that you just think, like, what's going on? Going beyond like maybe they're a little bit hungry, maybe they're a little bit tired. These things though can all trigger tantrums and meltdowns in situations where normally your child would typically be able to cope with it. So how do we help a child to manage their emotions better? In the longer term, there are lots of things that we can do, things we can put in place, things we can practice to help them to develop their emotional resilience. But that's a video for another day. Today's video is really about those tips when you're right in the middle of this tricky time. But if you have got questions about it or how we kind of handle emotional regulation in the longer term or any tips for that, then pop them in the comments and I'll come back to you. How do we know when it's time to step in and help them? Ultimately, we want to and we need to comfort our children. Mid-tantrum is not the time to kind of try and teach them these tips and tricks. Mid-tantrum is just the time to stay close to them and help them as much as you can and as much as they want you to. It is a bit of a balance between intervening and saying too much, and it is also something that's quite individual. Some children will want a cuddle, some children will want you to be close to them, and others will want to take themselves away. That's okay. Try to stay as close by as you can so that you're there for them. Some children will almost push you away and act like they don't want you there, but it's because they're so overwhelmed. Most children don't want to be shut in their bedroom on their own to cope with these feelings on their own. They want to have you as their safe adult with them, but they might not always show that in the most obvious way. Whatever we do, we want to make sure that we're not invalidating their feelings. How would we feel if we felt incredibly overwhelmed with something and someone said to us, oh, it's not a big deal, come on, everyone else is fine. Like, why are you making so much of a fuss? Like, no one else is creating like this. Like, how would it make us feel? And I think actually that's one tip for everything when it comes to parenting your children. How would you want to be treated in that situation? How would you feel if you were overwhelmed? Okay, yeah, they might be overwhelmed because they've got a blue cup instead of a green cup. But if you can put that into your adult brain, in a situation where you might feel overwhelmed because you've got, oh, do you do the ironing first or the washing up, or do you do that? You know, those things that we encounter every day, we feel really overwhelmed with. And if I was to say to you, well, actually, it's not a big deal because someone else doesn't even have a washing machine and someone else doesn't have food to eat, so they can't wash up. That might be true. How would it make you feel in that moment when you're overwhelmed? And that's just something for us to consider when we're interacting with our children in these really tricky moments for them. So how do we talk to our children about their big feelings without invalidating them? The first thing is to really listen to them. There's a bit of an old-fashioned view that you may have heard before. I know it's something that I definitely heard a lot of before I became a parent and I was just working with children. Is that, you know, leave them to calm down, give them time to calm down and just let them get on with it, or, you know, they'll be fine in a minute. And there is an element that some children might want a moment just quietly without us chatting away at them. But this idea that they should be sent to a timeout or excluded from something until they can calm down, it's just not my way of doing things. You're not alone if you've been given this advice or if up until now you felt like that was the right thing to do. But in the longer term, my experience is that this is not beneficial for our children or for our relationships with them. So what do you do then when their meltdown is at its peak and you just want things to calm down a little? I've got a step-by-step guide for you. Number 1, pause and breathe. It is really natural as the parent to feel overwhelmed by their meltdown, especially if you're in a public place. I had a conversation with a colleague once where she talked about our ASDA behaviour, and it's always really stuck with me that when you're in ASDA on a Saturday morning and your child's creating and you're aware that everyone's watching you, you might deal with your child's tantrum in one way, and that might be quite different to on a Friday evening when you've just had enough and you just want them to go to bed and they're shouting and screaming and you're overwhelmed. It's different, and she referred to it as our ASDA behaviour and how sometimes in public she would find a tantrum much easier to deal with, and I'm the same. But for other people, and this might be the case for you, you're in a public place and you feel like everyone's watching you and everyone's judging your child and you just need them to stop because everyone thinks you've got no control. Try to care less about what the random person in aisle 3 thinks of you, because most people will just be grateful that they're not in your position. And if they feel like you're not dealing with something properly, they don't know your child, they don't know what's gone on up until now. They're not having to live your life day in, day out. Just please try not to care what they think. Easier said than done, I know. But your first job really is to regulate yourself. As your child's parent, your child's behaviour is meant to trigger you. It's a basic survival instinct for them that they need you to keep them alive. So their behaviour is meant to trigger something in your own brain, and it's really normal if that makes you feel dysregulated or overwhelmed or just completely out of control. It's a normal human thing. There's nothing wrong with you if you feel annoyed in that situation. So the first thing to do is pause, breathe, collect your own thoughts for a moment. Number 2, listen and label. try to really listen to what your child is upset about. Now, if there is just noise and crying and screaming and they're not saying any words, then that's that is trickier. But still, can you try and see what they might be upset about? What is it that's caused it? Even if it's that, or maybe it's that their wellies feel uncomfortable and it's just finally got too much for them, or they wanted a toy and they didn't get it. What is it that might have caused this upset? And it's, you might not be able to get to the bottom of that every time, but if you can, really try to listen to what they're saying, notice what their behaviour is doing, and see if that kind of gives you any clues. And then comes the labelling part. I don't mean saying things like, you're being so silly or you're being naughty. We don't want to label our children in a negative way. But we can label the emotions. So you could say, I think you're feeling sad because you wanted that toy. Have I got that right? I think you're feeling angry because, am I understanding you? And check in with them. Sometimes we just, again, when we put ourselves in that situation, when we're overwhelmed, we just want someone to say, is it because of this? Yeah, I get that too. It's not nice, is it? You just want someone, even if you're being completely irrational, you just want somebody else to get it. As parents, we just have to get it. So listen and label that feeling. We want to be compassionate and supportive. And sometimes children don't know what their feelings are. They don't necessarily know that rage inside them is anger. If they've never heard the word anger, if you've never talked about it, then they don't know. Their body just all of a sudden feels like too much for them, and their brain feels like too much, and they don't know what they're feeling. They don't know how to calm it down, and then it almost gets to a point where they might not even know why they were upset in the first place. Their body and their brain is just dysregulating and just taking over. They're not in control of their own behaviour anyway. Imagine how scary and overwhelming that must be. And in that moment as parents, we have the choice to either support them and try to understand them as best we can, or try and control and shut them down. And you can see how it's almost like trying to put a lid on a pot where everything's already bubbling over. Putting the lid on it isn't the way to simmer it down. So then we've got 3, validate and reassure. Even if your child appears to be upset over the most trivial thing, and like it just feels absolutely bananas that they're even upset about it, try to validate and reassure them. That's what they really need. As I said, adults overreact too, and they don't fare any better by somebody telling them that they're ridiculous. Quite often, that will make you feel worse. And the last thing we want to do is make our children's reactions bigger. Reassure your child by saying something like, it's okay to be upset. When you're ready, I'm here for you. Would you like a cuddle? I will look after you. Anything like that kind of reassures them that you're there. In that moment, your child's brain is in fight or flight mode and their nervous system is under threat. They don't need us to then feel like another threat on that. They need us to be a safe and secure place where they're safe to behave in that way, but it will then help their bodies and their brains to kind of regulate and settle into us a little bit more. So stay close by and avoid saying things like, right, if you're going to behave like that, I'm leaving you here. Stop doing that or I'm going. It's just going to exaggerate their feelings for them. It's also really scary for them to hear that at any time, especially when they're already upset. Number 4 is touch or twist. Some children will benefit from a cuddle. Other children will want to continue lying on the floor, kicking and screaming. That's okay. That might be what they need. If your child is somebody that wants a cuddle, you offer it and you give them a cuddle, great. If they don't, and they're happy with touch, you can put one hand over each of their arms. It would be like this on them. And then kind of gently stroke down. Can you see? Just gently stroking down the arm. It kind of helps to soothe them and calm them. And this is also a coping mechanism that you can teach them themselves, giving themselves their own hug and a squeeze. Again, it's something that takes practice. It's not something you can teach in that moment. If your child will let you touch them, then try that. I also use the word twist because I think of it as like a physical release. Like some children will need to twist and move and jump and wriggle their bodies. And that's absolutely okay too. Remember what I said earlier about needing to physically let those feelings out of their body. They need to let those emotions out. As a child, they don't have the same physical control over their body as we do. Like we can clench our fists and screw up our face. And you might see an older child do this. For a younger child, they're likely to move, like bigger movements. An older child, you might see a stamp of a foot. They're not being intentionally rude. They're trying to physically release that feeling. But it might be that that stamp of the foot triggers you because it was something that you weren't allowed to do with a child as a child, or that you feel that someone else is judging you for. So think of the word twist. How can they move their body to let those feelings come on out? You can say things like, it's okay to be angry. Let's do some stomping to let those feelings out. Or it's okay to feel cross. Let's run on the spot until we feel better. You might feel really odd doing that in a public place. So it might be that that's something you practice at home if it happens, or you can teach them as a coping mechanism at another time. Sometimes I'll say to my children, oh, when I feel cross, this is what I do. Because there'll be times when I'm cross and they're not, and that can actually be a really good teaching point for them. Redirect. It comes right at the end for a reason. If we do it too early, it can make things worse. If we do it and our children aren't ready for it, even if it's the last step, it can make things worse. So it's brilliant, but you'll need to judge when to use it. When a meltdown is at its peak, trying to say, oh, look at the sky, isn't that lovely, can sometimes make things worse, because to a child it can make them feel like you're ignoring them, you don't care about their feelings, you think they're overreacting. You might think they're overreacting, but in that moment, your job is to try and diffuse the situation. And if distracting them with something else makes them feel worse, avoid it. It might be that towards the end, when you've already done your validating and reassuring, your touching, your twisting, when you've done all of those things, it might be that then is a great time to redirect, where they've started to settle, they've started to calm, and you can say, oh, shall we go and have a look at this? Or, oh, shall we read a book now? You'll need to judge the situation when you're in it, and that might be different each time. Unless their safety is at risk, try to avoid picking them up and moving them out of the situation. And again, this might be something that you've been doing up until now, and that's okay because you didn't know. But again, put yourself in that situation. Say you're cross about something, your partner's not taking the bins out, and you're frustrated, and rather than listening and doing something about it, they just pick you up and move you to another room. Well, come on, we're going now. Right, well, we were going out anyway, so forget about the bins, get in the car. Like, when you put yourself as an adult in that situation, it's not okay, is it? So try to avoid, unless your child is in a situation where they're going to hurt themselves or something might fall on them, or there's a really good reason why you need to move them, try to avoid that. But yeah, as you notice them start to calm, you can say things like, shall we go and have a look at this? Or I found this over here, shall we go and see what that person's doing? Or, you can then redirect them onto something else once they're feeling calmer. So in summary, keep yourself calm first, stay as close to your child as possible, and try not to take it personally. Listening and validating your child will help them to settle much quicker. And actually, in the long run, the intensity, the frequency, the length, all of those things about their meltdowns will get smaller. It won't feel so intense for you. Their behaviour won't be as big and as embarrassing. They won't happen as frequently, especially if we're handling it in the right way. I promise, when they realise that you are on their side and you're working with them, not against them, it all becomes so much easier. Yes, it's probably a bit more work at first, but in the long run, it's so worth it. Anyway, you're doing a great job. If you love this video, then please, what is it you're meant to do? Like, share, subscribe? I don't know. Subscribe to the channel and come back next week for another video all about behaviour, big feelings, mental health and child development. Bye.